Rule 2, define meetings. Now, Joe talked about the importance of defining your meetings so people understand whether a meeting is relevant to them and how that's tied to employee engagement and retention. And from a practice perspective, I would say that of all the rules, if you're going to grab one and really dig into it, this is the one, because it makes a huge difference. And to illustrate that a little bit, let me tell you about the first software team I ever worked on when I began my professional career. So software development is an activity that requires all kinds of attention. It's not just typing. When people are writing software, they need to hold a lot of context in their head. And anytime they're interrupted, it can be really frustrating because they're paid and judged based on the quality of that software they're writing. And for this team that I worked on, they were often interrupted. They were called into meetings that had names like staff meeting or product team meeting. And if you're listening closely, you'll recognize that staff meeting doesn't define what that meeting's about. It defines who gets to come to that meeting. So for a software engineer, being required to show up for something that's called staff meeting, which doesn't tell them why it's relevant to them and their job, is a really frustrating experience. They're interrupted right in the middle of their work, and it takes them a long time to get back into it. So these engineers would be scheduled into all these meetings and frustrated that they're being interrupted, not sure why they needed to show up. They'd come, but they'd come grumpy. And you could see it because they would walk into the room and they'd sit off in a corner, and there was a lot of this going on. So even if that meeting happened to be relevant to them, they were already angry and they weren't going to hear it. So the kind of meeting where you're just inviting people like that not only interrupts the productive work people need to do, but it's impossible to achieve whatever that relevant goal actually was because everybody's angry to begin with. So in this team, it wasn't uncommon to hear an engineer say that, meetings are a waste of time and I hate meetings and we should cancel all meetings. So imagine my surprise when about a year or two into my term with that team, they went off and got some training and adopted a set of practices called Agile development. And Agile development spells out, among other things, some very specific ways to run meetings. In fact, there are a lot of specific meetings in the Agile development practice. Every single day, the team gets together to talk about what they're doing. That's a stand-up. And at the beginning of the week, they work through the list of things they're going to do and they sync up. It's their planning call. And at the end of the week, they look back at what they've done and they talk about what worked and what didn't and how to make it better for next time. And that's their retrospective. Now, a critical thing about each one of these meetings is they aren't actually called meetings. In Agile, they're called Agile rituals. So I watched this team of engineers who claimed to hate meetings adopt Agile and put onto their calendar proactively at least 6 and often 7 or 8 meetings every week. So what's going on here, right? It was a little bit of a fascinating cognitive dissonance, like I hate meetings and yet we're going to schedule all these meetings. Well, the difference was that in the Agile practices, or the Agile rituals that they were scheduling, they knew the exact purpose of each one. They knew exactly what it was for. They knew what they'd get at the end. They were well-defined and they were relevant. And with those Agile practices in place, that team got faster, they got better, and they shipped more quality software, even though theoretically they were being interrupted all the time. But when the meeting is relevant to what you're doing, because it's well-defined and gives you a clear outcome, it's not an interruption. That's what makes work go faster.